for the time. I really appreciate it. From a guy who works in crisis, certainly in food recall, this is a pleasure.
No, thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.
Yeah, so give us a little bit of your background. How do you get into this business? How did you matriculate up there? What are the kind of things that you've done in the course of your career?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's kind of like something I fell into. I mean, my background's in biology and chemistry, and at the time, when I was looking at where am I going to apply this, and where can I find a job, down the street from me was a dairy manufacturer. My father, who was a pharmacist, said, "Hey, why don't you look at them? They must have a lab." So I went there and I interviewed and ended up obtaining a job. And so I started in quality, which I think is a fantastic place to start because you understand all of the areas of risk and the opportunities for failure. And so I had done that for about a year and a half, and then I kind of moved into other roles within the plant. And at the same time, I ended up going back to school and for an MBA, and I'll touch on that a little bit. But I ended up starting on the quality side, and as things grew, I moved to the operation side. And throughout my entire career, which spans 30 years, I bounced between operations and quality my whole career at every level of the organization. So from, a lab technician to a department manager to a plant manager to a senior director, a VP, etc. But I had gone back and forth through that process. So what it did was it gave me a great perspective on seeing both sides of the fence. Because when you're in quality, you see one side. When you're in operations, you see the other side. And very rarely do people bounce back and forth like that. And through that, I ended up continuing to go to school because I was traveling a lot. So it's like, what better to do than to study? So I ended up actually I just finished my fourth master's degree, and they're all it's the MBA with finance, it's engineering management, it's food safety, and strategic leadership and executive um, strategy. And so through that, it gave me a great view of manufacturing and how I can embed myself to not only reduce risk, but to optimize the process for continued output. So it was kind of I fell into it, and at times I'd think about maybe I'm going to get into something else, maybe I'm going to go to a different industry, but it always came back to the same thing where everybody needs to eat, everybody needs to drink. And so, therefore, there's no more stable environment than food manufacturing. And we saw that really play out with COVID, right? When all
Right.
these industries were, they're falling by the wayside, food manufacturing continued. And, it was really focused on employee health at that point in time.
So I appreciate that, and I absolutely can see the value in any particular economic times. But what I really would love for you to dive into a little bit is what gets involved in a recall.
Yeah, that's a great question because not a lot of people think about it in a preventative or proactive perspective. Because first and foremost, nobody thinks they're going to have a recall. And I
Right.
had gone through one, and it was, the costs were in excess of $100 million. And if you had asked me prior to that, I would have said, "Oh, we'll never have a recall. Everything's buttoned up." But there's so many different factors that come into play. And so when you look at it, first and foremost, I mean, most of the recalls are voluntary, right? They're very I mean, there are some that are driven by regulators, but a lot of times a company will look at that and say, okay, well, we have an issue here. The faster that we can respond, the quicker that we can prevent people from getting sick, the quicker that we can recover, the quicker that we can, keep our brand safe. And so when you look at it, it's making sure that you're prepared for it. And again, most people don't prepare for that. And what they'll do is in food manufacturing and beverage and pharmaceuticals and a number of other industries, they'll do, people will say we're going to do a mock recall. But what, in fact, a lot of companies do is they do a traceability exercise. And all that is finding out, okay, we think we had this ingredient, it went into this product, and this is where it was shipped.
Mm.
So check, we did all those. Everything is good. But the truth of the matter is, if you do a full mock recall and you carry it out to the nth degree, saying, okay, we did our traceability, but now what happens? And I think this is the piece that most people they don't think of because um, it takes time to really do a full-blown recall, and that is, or a mock recall. Okay, we've done the traceability. Now what's next? Okay, well, there's the communication side. There is the investigative side. There's the reacting to regulator piece. There's just so many different components that are really not carried out in that traceability exercise. So what I encourage people to do is really conduct a mock recall and identify your areas of risk, areas of gaps, and then make sure that you have enough resources to deal with that. Because when you have a recall, again, the ones that I've been involved in have been very large, and they've been ones that they really just consume a tremendous amount of resources. And those resources, those people also have jobs, right? So now you
Right.
have all of these
Right.
jobs that are not being done because they're consumed with the recall, but you still have production to make and all of these other things. So you really have to go through that process and identify the gaps. Once you have that plan in place, you need to follow it every step of the way, right? Otherwise, when people start going off on tangents, that's when things really start to unravel in a very negative fashion.
With all those people involved in food manufacturing, can a recall be prevented?
It can. I mean, it takes a lot of work, right? And so when you look at the big companies, I mean, just recently, and I don't want to name anyone's names, but if you go to the FDA website or USDA websites on the recalls, you see very big brands, very big names. And it's interesting because a lot of people talk about, oh, we need more regulation or we need more oversight or whatever. And it's interesting because, I don't believe in that. Like I believe that we need to have the FDA and the USDA and set those guidelines, but it really comes down to making sure that to your point, you follow every step. So when you look at this, like the big brands, they have very big infrastructures. They have a lot of people. They follow all the guidelines.
Right.
The one thing I say to people, it comes down to the execution. And exactly to your point, it's making sure that people have eyes on every step of the process, not in a micromanaging fashion, but really getting engaged and getting with people. I mean, if you talk to anybody that I worked with, they'll tell you that I was on the floor a majority of my time, and it was not to micromanage anybody because you'll never be effective if you do that.
Right.
It's just to talk to people and find out. You have to build that relationship with people so they realize, hey, I can tell the plant manager, the vice president, Bob, I can tell them anything. And I know that it's not going to come back to bite me. It's going to improve the process. So, people today, they talk about psychological safety. The more that you can get people to be open and engaged and to provide input on how they would do it, because they see it every day. Like I'd go up to operators and I'd be like, you do this 8 to 10 hours a day, every day. If you think for a second, I'm going to come down here and be the expert, no way. Like you are the expert of this. So tell me what your biggest areas of risk are. Tell me what your challenges are. And the more that you have that dialogue, the better off you can be to get bits and pieces to improve their life and to reduce risk. But it has to start at the very beginning. I mean, we see this a lot today. It starts with the ingredients, like to your point with, organic farming or whatever.
Mhm.
If you don't have the right starting point, like anything, it's only going to increase with risk as you go through the process. So the starting point has to be clean and has to be free of risk. And you have to do your work up front. And again, it goes back to having good relationships with your suppliers, right? It's when you go and you start sourcing from the lowest cost ingredient, well, sometimes you get what you pay for, right? Because there's,
What are the must-dos for any food manufacturer uh, in a recall situation?
yeah, I mean, first and foremost, you have to have that plan, right? And you have to make sure that that plan is your book that you go to. And whether it's online or it is, wherever it is, it's something that people can pick up and it's very clear and it's very simple. Just like, I mean, you had indicated you were in the military. Like all of your SOPs were pretty much broken down to simplicity. So it could be executed by anybody. Like if I
Right.
walked in, I could execute it and I could do it quickly and rapidly and make sure that all of those resources are there because it's important to make sure that like if okay, I have Dave in this role, and all of a sudden Dave's not there today. Like, who's
Right.
going to do that, right? So there
Yeah.
has to be different layers and different contingency plans in place because things are going to change through that process. But you have to have that plan, and then you have to follow that process and make sure that everybody knows their roles and they know exactly what to do in those roles. But the next piece is critical, and it's to have a solid communication plan because when people start communicating internally,
Mhm.
and that's where it should, like, that plan should include internal communications and external communications, and in making sure that all that information goes to a central point so people can understand exactly what's going on. Because when you have, again, when you have people that are communicating in their little groups, that communication has to be correct and it has to be funneled in the right fashion. And I think one of the most critical things is once you're going to have a recall or you decide you're going to have a recall, it's to say, okay, this is the product that we have.
Mhm.
You have to have a little bit of a buffer. And when I say a little bit, something that you know that when we go out with the recall, we're doing it one time. And I think, a lot of stuff that you do, and I think you would agree when someone has a recall, if they have to have a secondary recall or a
Yeah.
third recall, like there's nothing more damaging.
Yep.
So I tell people, like, cast that net big enough so you get everything, right? Do your homework as quickly but as accurately as possible. Identify what it is and then go get it. But then once you cast that net, make sure you get it. Like there was just a recall that happened last week, a big major brand they had issued a recall, I think it was in January, and they just came out with a secondary notice, but it was because it appears that that product wasn't all pulled off of the shelves. And this was an infant type product. So now you've had product out there for a long time. And so you got to cast the net, you got to get the product, and you have to verify that you got the product. Right? Those are some of the critical pieces that, I mean, again, there's a lot of other things, but
Sure.
those are the critical ones. But communication, that I've seen that this is your space, right? That's what
Right.
you do, and you can see things be done very well, or things go really poorly if it's not followed properly.
No, I'm right there with you. It's if people will give you a second chance, a third chance, that's
Yeah.
not likely, right? Okay, so with that in mind, this is probably something you've
Yeah.
sort of touched on already, but some of the never do's in a recall situation, things that you just want to avoid at all costs.
Yeah, I think, some of the things are really around speculation. When I look at it from the challenges that I've faced, you never want to speculate or make assumptions or false claims, right? Especially when you're talking to people outside of your organization. You're talking to regulators, you're talking to attorneys, you're talking to the companies that if you're co-packing, you're making product for. You
Right.
you never want to speculate because it's those speculations that will come back during discovery or some other part of the process where it's like, okay, well, you said this and now you're saying this, right? And so what happens is you start losing credibility and that really like the confidence, everything goes down if that information is incorrect. And I think the other never to do is, and I'm not a control freak, but in this regard, you never want to allow uncommunicated or uncontrolled communications to go out. And I've seen that be so damaging to people, like, because you have all of, like, again, in food manufacturing, you have your quality, your operations, procurement,
Yep.
engineering, and all that. And they have people that they know in these other companies. So if you recall, say you're making a product for somebody and it's a big brand, well, at the top, they're going to be communicating, but you're also going to have people calling into the company from other departments. And what you want to make sure is that you're not trying to, you want to control that communication process. You're not trying to withhold information. You just want to make sure what goes out is accurate and correct. Because if it's not, that's when it really, really goes bad. And then you start finding out, like, if you're the recall coordinator and it's like, okay, well, here's the path and this is what we're telling everybody because this is what happened. And then you have all their information from some other source that came in saying, well, so and so said this, and so said this. And so now you have to spend time figuring out what happened and making sure you get everybody back on the same page. But again, now your credibility goes way down because there's miscommunication and misinformation. And so that's really bad.
I, I I really do appreciate that, and it rings very similar in my little world. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Hey, you have a book that you put together to sort of give a playbook for folks in the industry. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so this was kind of an interesting one. I mean, after I'd gone through a very large recall, I had a couple years later, I was working for another company, and somebody said to me, nobody's ever written a book on what really happens in a recall. And I laughed and I said, oh, I can do that, right? And so I went home that night and I wrote it. And it took me a very short period of time to write it. And then obviously, you know, putting it all together and
Right.
releasing it's a different story. But that's what the book is all about. It starts on really what happened with me, and then it really shifts to the prevention side because that's where the money that's where the savings of money comes into play. But more importantly, you're saving consumers if you focus on prevention. And so um, it's a book called In the Midst of a Recall, and it's a very simple read. I've had people tell me, I read it on the plane, 3 hour flight. It was done, and I tried to make it very similar to the Harvard Business Review books that are very simple to read. You can get it on my website, manningresource.com, or on Amazon. But it was really written to help people and to provide information that is what they need to know. And once they get there, they can dig a little bit further and figure out what areas they need to fix.
Bob, I really appreciate the conversation and hearing about your story and giving us a little bit of insights.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And I hope people really focus on your area of expertise because we talk about communication. That's really where it all lies because we can do all the work in the plants but that information needs to be communicated properly. So I see this being something that I share with everybody that I talk to, having you go into their facilities and really put that communication plan in place.
Thanks, Bob. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.